I reported sexual harassment. Here's why I built an ecosystem for people fighting. I reported sexual harassment because I thought speaking up would make me safer. Instead, the person I reported gained more information. I lost protection, and the workplace began studying me. My tone, my leadership, my documentation, my reactions. The harassment stayed ambiguous enough to explain away. The retaliation did not. And once I started connecting the pattern, I learned something people rarely tell you. Corrupt employers can make the truth so expensive, confusing, and exhausting to uncover that surviving the process becomes its own full-time job. This is not just the story of what happened to me. It is the story of why I am building an entire ecosystem for people facing powerful systems before those systems take away their choices. I did not wake up one morning and decide I wanted to build an ecosystem around sexual harassment, workplace politics, retaliation, documentation, legal survival, and recovery. That would have been a very strange hobby. I built it because I learned what happens when the person harassing you is only one part of the danger. I learned what happens when a powerful man tests your boundaries slowly enough to keep each moment explainable. I learned what happens when you stop giving him the access he wants. And I learned what can happen when a workplace receives the pattern, protects its image, and decides the person speaking is easier to remove than the person creating the problem. Whew! Even now, saying sexual harassment out loud makes something in me tighten. Not because I do not understand what happened, because the behavior was built to survive explanation. It did not begin with one dramatic scene. There was no explicit proposition. No written message saying, "Give me affection and I will support your career." No single moment packaged neatly enough for everyone to agree on what it meant. It was slower than that. Compliments about my body, how good I looked in jeans, requests for hugs, a hand on my back, a touch at my wrist, standing too close, looking into my office, entering spaces where I had tried to create privacy, sniffing near my neck, crowding, looming, watching how I reacted, testing, backing off, testing again. And no, he did not treat men that way. He was not asking men for hugs. He was not sniffing their necks. He was not putting his hands on their backs. He was not touching their wrists. He was not using that same physical familiarity with them. That matters. People love explaining away gendered behavior by calling someone affectionate, friendly, awkward, or from another generation. But friendliness that repeatedly lands on women's bodies is not neutral. Physical access reserved for women is not just personality. And intimidation that grows after a woman creates distance is not harmless affection. He did not behave that way with everybody. He behaved that way with me. The behavior lived in the space people call gray when they do not want to look too closely. He did not touch a private area. He did not make an explicit sexual demand. He did not say the quiet part out loud. So every incident came with its own little alibi. It was only a compliment. He was only being friendly. He hugs people. He did not mean anything by it. Maybe he did not realize you were uncomfortable. Maybe you should have been more direct. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe you are too sensitive. There is always a maybe waiting to rescue the person with power. That is how plausible deniability works. The person crosses your boundaries softly enough that you are expected to explain why it felt wrong. Then you start gathering context, because you do not want to accuse anyone unfairly. You study the behavior. You watch whether it happens again, You stay professional. You move away. You create distance. You avoid being alone. You angle your body toward the exit. You keep doors open. You adjust where you stand. You make your body say no before you are ready to make your mouth say it. And when you successfully prevent the situation from becoming more extreme, people use that success against you. Nothing worse happened. You got away, you handled it. So was it really serious? That logic has always frustrated me. I prevented physical escalation. I did not prevent harm. Those are not the same thing. The public loves asking why people do not report earlier. Earlier than what? Earlier than the moment you understand the attention is connected to power. Earlier than the moment you realize the man touching you also controls access, approval, professional support, or reputation. Earlier than the moment you know whether saying no will cost you your job. Earlier than the moment you have savings, a lawyer, another position, a clean copy of your records, an exit plan. You are not a psychic. You do not plan for harassment. You plan to go to work. You do not begin a job by creating a legal fund in case an older man decides your boundaries are inconvenient. You do not know which compliment will become touching, which request for closeness will become entitlement, which boundary will turn warmth into hostility. Which powerful man will decide your independence is now a professional problem? People say, report immediately, like reporting is a neutral little task you complete between meetings. Like you fill out a form and protection arrives. But your paycheck is attached to that report. Your health insurance may be attached to it. Your references, your professional network, your housing, your ability to take care of yourself. Your ability to survive long enough for the truth to matter. It is easy to give advice when your livelihood is not tied to the outcome. It is easy to say, go to HR, when you are not the one wondering whether HR will warn the person you reported before doing anything to protect you. It is easy to say, I would never tolerate that, when you are not standing in the room calculating whether a stronger rejection will trigger professional retaliation. Sometimes delay is not weakness. Sometimes delay is survival. Sometimes a person is trying to understand what is happening. Sometimes they are saving money, looking for another job, watching whether the behavior escalates, trying to preserve evidence, trying to leave without losing everything. Sometimes they are afraid the workplace will retaliate. Sometimes they have already seen what corrupt employers do to people who speak. Sometimes they are right. This was not the first time an older man with power made me uncomfortable at work. That part is difficult to admit because when a pattern happens more than once, shame tries to crawl in. Why did this keep happening? What was I doing? What did they see in me? Was I too nice? Too quiet? Too accommodating? Did I make people think I would not say anything? I had to come to terms with the fact that those questions were pointed in the wrong direction. The responsibility did not belong to me. Across different workplaces, I experienced versions of the same exchange. Attention presented as support. Access presented as mentorship. Professional opportunity tangled with personal availability. Praise when I made a man feel important. Warmth when I gave him attention. Distance when I created a boundary. Support that became harder to reach when I stopped playing the emotional role he wanted from me. Sometimes it felt like quid pro quo without the clean sentence people expect. Nobody sat me down and said, give me affection or lose support. Make me feel wanted or lose access. Let me touch you, or your career will suffer. It was quieter than that. I support you when you make me feel good. I praise you when you make me feel needed. I help you when you allow me to feel like the rescuer. I withdraw when you become independent. I question your attitude when you stop giving me personal access. I become colder when you stop performing warmth. The exchange was not written down. You felt it in the temperature change. You felt it when the person who once praised your talent began scrutinizing your tone. You felt it when support became conditional, when messages went unanswered, when your independence became disrespect, when your boundary became a leadership concern, when the man who had been physically familiar with you began using his authority more aggressively after you pulled away. That is what makes this kind of harassment so confusing. The professional and personal become braided together. The same man can recommend you for an opportunity, call you a role model, and praise your work. Then privately undermine you, control you, demand deference, withhold support, make you feel as though basic professional cooperation depends on managing his emotions. That contradiction keeps you stuck. You think, maybe I read it wrong. Maybe the praise means he supports me. Maybe the recommendation proves he is not retaliating. Maybe the good moments cancel the bad ones. Maybe I should try harder to preserve the relationship. And look, I did try. I tried to be fair. I tried to understand intent. I tried not to turn every uncomfortable moment into a conclusion. I tried to keep the relationship functional because I still had a job to do. Some of that was professionalism. Some of it was also me doing far too much emotional labor for someone who controlled my access to work. I learned when to reassure him, when to soften, when to bring him an issue in a way that allowed him to feel like he was fixing something, when to let him take credit so the work could keep moving, when to hold back because sharing too much might create another struggle over control, when to manage his perception of me so I could keep doing my job. That is not mentorship. That is not ordinary supervision. That is emotional labor performed for the person who controls your access to work. And once I began pulling back from the physical contact and personal access, he noticed immediately. Of course he did. People who benefit from your accommodation often recognize your boundary before they acknowledge why it exists. I became more careful, more distant, more independent. I limited unnecessary interaction. I stopped providing casual access. I clarified that I value personal space. I tried to keep everything professional. That should have been enough. Instead, the pressure changed form. The focus moved to my engagement, my visibility, my leadership style, my tone, my communication, my willingness to follow his preferred methods. My independence became a problem. My networking became something I was expected to clear through him. My professional curiosity became something that needed supervision. Support became conditional. The same person who had praised me could now explain why he could not support me in the way I needed unless I complied with his preferred approach. That stayed with me. Support is one of the strongest currencies a supervisor controls. It affects whether your concerns are believed, whether the people around you respect your authority, whether your work receives what it needs, whether your decisions stand, whether you are protected when someone challenges you. And I had already learned that his warmth depended on access and emotional compliance. Now the conditional nature of the professional relationship was harder to ignore. When the softer methods stopped working, the pressure escalated. Charm had not made me compliant. Praise had not made me dependent. Physical familiarity had not made me accept more access. Conditional support had not broken my spirit. I began speaking more clearly, I documented more. I challenged false statements. I reached beyond him for help. I stopped shrinking to protect his ego, and the physical intimidation intensified. It felt like he had failed to make me smaller, so he began trying to make me afraid. People often treat harassment and retaliation as two separate stories. They are not always separate. Sometimes retaliation begins when the person realizes the boundary is real. Sometimes professional punishment is part of the same pattern as the touching. Sometimes the person with power moves from attention to access, to withdrawal, to intimidation. I kept waiting for someone to look at the sequence. Instead, people kept looking for one dramatic act. But the sequence was the story. I eventually reported, not one compliment, not one touch, not one uncomfortable moment. I reported the pattern, the body-focused attention, the physical access, the touching, the crowding, the intimidation, the professional undermining. The change after I created boundaries, the retaliation, the way his authority grew while mine weakened. I brought evidence. I brought context. I believed that once the pattern was visible, the workplace would evaluate the pattern. That was my mistake. The workplace fragmented it. A comment about my body became a compliment. A request for physical closeness became friendliness. A touch became an isolated interaction. Crowding became a personal space issue. Sniffing near my neck became easy to dismiss because there was no photograph and no private area contact. Physical intimidation became subjective discomfort. Conditional support became management style. Retaliation became ordinary supervision. Every event was separated from the one before it. Cause was removed from effect. The timeline was pulled apart until nothing appeared connected. That is how corrupt employers make a pattern disappear. They do not always have to say you are lying. They just make every piece small enough to dismiss. Then they study you, your tone, your leadership, your communication, your personality, your documentation, your leave, your relationships, your reactions, your ability to remain calm while being touched, crowded, undermined, monitored, and questioned. The man with power gets context. You get a character assessment. That is a very different game. And it is especially different when you are fighting a powerful man alone. Alone, every fact becomes your interpretation. Every boundary becomes your attitude. Every delay becomes suspicious. Every emotional reaction becomes evidence against you. He has a title: relationships, history, people who depend on him, people who benefit from believing him, people invested in the idea that he is nice. You have your body telling you something is wrong and a collection of moments designed to remain deniable. I had strong professional feedback. People had described me as professional, grounded, supportive, collaborative, organized, approachable, hardworking, and valuable. But once the workplace needed a different story, those qualities could be relabeled. Thorough became rigid. Independent became difficult. Results-oriented became controlling. Direct became unprofessional. Documentation became excessive. Standards became inflexibility. The same strengths that once made me valuable became evidence that I was the problem. The work did not suddenly change. The interpretation changed. That did not make me furious. It made me analytical. I wanted to understand the mechanism. How does a respected employee become a reputational problem? How does evidence become a personality flaw? How does a complaint about someone with power become an examination of the person who reported it? How does a workplace take a connected sequence and make every part look unrelated? How does somebody receive praise in public while being punished in private? I kept looking for the structure underneath the behavior. That is how my mind works. I analyze, I map, I compare, I notice where the story changes. I look for the point where a process stops seeking truth and starts protecting an image. But analysis did not prevent the emotional impact. Understanding the mechanism did not make me immune to it. Eventually, I was removed from the workplace and separated from my email, files, records, and work product. I lost access to materials I would need to understand and defend what had happened. That kind of removal is not only administrative, it tells a story. People see you disappear. They see your access vanish. They see someone else take over your work. They fill in the silence. The process may be called confidential. Your absence is not. That is one of the cruelest tricks. The evidence stays private. The suspicion becomes public. Then you go home and try to reconstruct your own reality. Emails, screenshots, texts, policies and meeting notes, dates, attachments, contradictions, statements that do not match the documents, conclusions that do not match the actions, actions that do not match the findings. It became a second career. Except this career did not pay me. It cost me money, sleep, time, focus, trust, energy I needed for recovery. There was also a missing jump drive containing private working files. I cannot prove who took it. I know the difference between what I can establish and what I strongly suspect. But later references made me question whether information from private material had entered the process without a transparent source trail. I did not receive a clean explanation showing where every reference came from. So I was left trying to defend myself against information I could not fully trace. That uncertainty was not neutral. The workplace knew what it collected, who supplied it, what was reviewed, where documents came from. I was the one left guessing. Then access to records became its own fight. What should have been a clear request became a maze of categories, review, delay, addenda, and redactions. When I was exposed, confidentiality had flexibility. When I wanted to understand the evidence being used against me, confidentiality became a wall. Documents had to be reviewed. Opinions had to be protected. Information had to be redacted. Additional time was needed. The truth had paperwork now. That made the case expensive to uncover. Being harmed is one cost. Proving the harm is another. You may have to pay someone to read what you already lived through. Pay someone to organize the documents. Pay someone to identify contradictions. Pay someone to explain the law. Pay someone to write the letter. Pay someone else after the first person disappoints you. Every time you change lawyers, you pay another person to learn the story from the beginning. Every retelling costs money. Every retelling also costs something emotionally. You keep reopening the wound so a stranger can decide whether the case is strong enough, simple enough, profitable enough, or worth the risk. That left me vulnerable to predatory lawyers. Not every lawyer, but enough. When you are scared, locked out of evidence, facing deadlines, and desperate for someone to understand, confidence can sound like competence. You want someone to take over. You want someone to make it stop. You want to believe the person collecting the retainer has a plan. And when you have already been betrayed by a workplace, being mishandled by someone you hired to protect you hits differently. It confirms the ugliest fear, that everyone can see you are trapped, that everyone understands the information imbalance, that everyone knows you cannot afford to walk away, that your vulnerability has become part of the market. Corrupt employers do not only harm people through the original conduct, they can make the truth so expensive to reconstruct that ordinary people cannot afford to keep fighting. They have HR, legal counsel, investigators, insurance, internal records, policies, time, money, and people whose full-time job is protecting the workplace. You have a nervous system, a folder, whatever evidence you manage to preserve, and whatever money is left after the first lawyer. That is not an equal fight. I had already learned that challenging power can cost you. In another workplace, I experienced sexual harassment, but I did not report it. During that same period, another woman and I were both experiencing racial discrimination. We were able to recognize the pattern in each other's treatment. She could speak to what she saw happening to me, and I could speak to what I saw happening to her. Having another person say, "No, you are not imagining this," mattered. It helped me trust what I was seeing. But recognition did not protect our livelihoods. We both lost our positions in different ways. I was pressured to resign and agreed to terms that limit what I can discuss publicly, so I have to be careful about the details. What I can say is that challenging power came with a price. That experience was not a sexual harassment report. I did not report that part of what happened to me. But it taught me something I would understand even more clearly later. It is a very different game when you are fighting a powerful person alone. When someone else can see the pattern, you are no longer trapped inside your own interpretation. There is another memory, another set of eyes, another person who can say the treatment was not normal. That matters, but shared truth does not guarantee protection. Sometimes you prove the pattern and still lose the job. Sometimes the win is that the people involved know they were not imagining it. That is a real win. It is also an expensive one. Corroboration matters. Collective memory matters. Having someone else say, "I saw it too," matters. But corrupt employers can still remove the people speaking while protecting the image around the people with power. That earlier experience shaped how I understood the risk of reporting later. I already knew that being right did not make me safe. I already knew that another person confirming the pattern did not guarantee that either of us would keep our livelihood. And I already knew silence could become part of the price of leaving. I am speaking from the experience I know. In my experience, powerful men harassed me. Older men used workplace power, attention, access, and professional support in ways that placed me in uncomfortable positions. In another workplace, another woman and I were able to recognize and confirm patterns of racial discrimination in each other's treatment. I also experienced sexual harassment there, but I did not report it. That does not mean harassment, retaliation, or workplace abuse only move in one gender direction. It means I am not going to erase the gendered reality of what happened to me to make the story easier for everyone else to hear. The broader pattern is about power. Anyone can be targeted by someone with more status, influence, access, or control over their livelihood. Anyone can experience conditional support. Anyone can be punished for creating distance. Anyone can be defamed after speaking. Anyone can watch a corrupt employer protect the person whose accountability would threaten the workplace's image. I am telling the version I lived, and that version forced me to confront a word I resisted for a long time. Victim. I did not want that word. I am a strong woman. I solve problems. I build things. I move. I adapt. I analyze. I find the pattern. Calling myself a victim felt like giving away all of that. It sounded passive, weak, like I was defining myself by what somebody else did, so I kept reaching for other language. Targeted, mistreated, retaliated against, harmed. All true, but I was also victimized. That is true too. And accepting that truth has been one of the harder parts of recovery. Being a victim does not mean I lacked strength. It means someone used power against me. It means conduct was directed at me that I did not invite and could not fully control. It means my ability to prevent the worst possible outcome does not erase the violation that already occurred. It means I should not have needed to be stronger than the conditions around me just to remain safe at work. I can be strong and still have been a victim. I can be analytical and still have been hurt. I can understand the machinery and still grieve what it cost me. I can build an entire ecosystem from the experience and still admit that I did not choose the experience. Strength does not require me to rewrite harm as a lesson before I am allowed to name it. That realization has brought more disappointment than anger. Disappointment in people. Disappointment in workplaces that advertise values they do not practice under pressure. Disappointment in systems that understand power very well, but pretend not to see it when accountability becomes inconvenient. And disappointment that I spent so much time believing being strong meant I should be able to prevent people from victimizing me. That was never the standard. My strength was never supposed to function as their permission. Understanding the cause means placing responsibility where it belongs. The cause was not that I was too nice, too quiet, too independent, too visible, too ambitious, too trusting, too direct. The cause was that people with power chose to use it inappropriately. The cause was that boundaries threatened access they had begun to expect. The cause was that corrupt employers found image protection easier than accountability. The cause was not my inability to endure more gracefully. That is what I am learning to embrace. Not helplessness, accuracy. And that accuracy changed what I decided to build. This ecosystem did not begin with a business plan. It began with one question. What would I have needed before this happened? I would have needed language. Someone to explain that sexual harassment can be intentionally ambiguous, that a person does not have to touch a private area for the conduct to matter, that body-focused comments, unwanted hugs, touching, sniffing, crowding, forced proximity, and gendered physical access can form a pattern. That preventing physical escalation does not erase what you prevented. I would have needed language for quid pro quo that does not arrive as a written demand. A way to recognize when professional support is tangled with personal availability, when attention is becoming access, when warmth is conditional, when a boundary causes praise, opportunity, or protection to disappear. I would have needed to understand retaliation before it became obvious, to know that the complaint might be shared before I was protected, that the person I reported could adjust his strategy once he knew, that the focus could shift from what he did to who I was, that a workplace could receive the evidence and still choose image management over truth. I would have needed an evidence plan, copies stored outside workplace systems, a personal timeline, a way to separate facts, interpretations, suspicions, and missing information, a plan for private working files, questions to ask before hiring a lawyer, warning signs for someone selling hope instead of strategy, A financial cushion, an exit plan, permission to protect my livelihood before becoming everybody else's idea of brave. I would have needed emotional tools too, because your nervous system cannot live inside constant threat assessment forever. You cannot spend every hallway watching hands, every meeting tracking faces, every email anticipating how it may be rewritten, every night replaying the day. You need oxygen. You need something that helps you separate what happened from what the workplace says happened. You need recovery that does not demand you become a warrior every morning. That is why I am building stories, games, assessments, podcasts, field guides, documentation tools, workplace survival kits, positive counterweights, music, and interactive decisions. Some people will enter through a story because they are not ready for a checklist. Some will enter through a game because they need to practice reading behavior before the stakes include income and health insurance. Some need evidence tools. Some need an exit map. Some need a sentence to use when their mind goes blank. Some need to remember who they were before a workplace taught them to doubt themselves. This is not random content. It is infrastructure. Corrupt employers rely on isolation, confusion, expense, and exhaustion. They rely on people not knowing what to call the behavior. They rely on targets waiting for one perfect incident. They rely on evidence remaining in systems the workplace controls. They rely on employees reporting before they are financially prepared. They rely on the public asking why someone waited instead of asking what made reporting unsafe. They rely on people becoming too tired to keep reconstructing the truth. They rely on silence. I did not stay silent, but I will not romanticize what speaking cost. I lost a 6-figure job. I lost money trying to uncover what happened. I lost time, trust, professional momentum, pieces of my sense of safety. I had to rebuild while still trying to understand the damage. Some days, I am proud of what I created. Some days I am frustrated that creating it required me to look so closely at experiences I would rather never have had. Some days I am disappointed that understanding the pattern did not make the harm easier to accept. And some days I am still learning how to say, without shrinking from the word, I was a victim. Not forever, not as my entire identity, but in those experiences, yes. Someone used power against me. A workplace failed to protect me. Other people benefited from my silence. That truth does not reduce me. It explains what I survived. I am not grateful for the harassment. I am not grateful for the physical intimidation. I am not grateful for older men who treated professional power like personal access. I am not grateful for corrupt employers that protected image over people. I am not grateful for lawyers who recognized vulnerability and saw an opportunity. I am not turning any of that into a cute motivational quote. But I am proud that they did not get to decide what the experience meant. I kept studying the pattern. I started preserving the sequence. I began building language for the things people are usually expected to feel before they can name. I started creating free doors because I know how expensive confusion can become. That is why the channel remains faceless. I do not want people studying my expression and deciding whether I look harmed enough. I do not want the work reduced to one man, one workplace, one legal case, or one version of harassment. I want people to recognize themselves. I want the person watching late at night to hear one sentence and finally understand why their body has been on alert. I want them to know you can prevent physical escalation and still have experienced sexual harassment. You can delay reporting and still be telling the truth. You can be praised publicly and punished privately. You can have excellent reviews and still be defamed. You can find other people with similar stories and still lose your job. You can win part of the truth and still pay dearly for it. You can be targeted by someone powerful without having one perfect piece of evidence. You can be failed by a corrupt employer without being confused about what happened. You can be strong and still have been victimized. And you are allowed to plan for survival before you report. I built my life by learning how to move. Then I learned what happens when powerful people try to trap you inside their version of the story. Now I am building exits. Not one exit, many. A story, a game, a worksheet, a podcast, a question someone did not know they were allowed to ask, a reminder to save the email somewhere safe, a way to recognize conditional support, a way to notice when attention becomes access, a way to understand the room before the room defines you, a path back to yourself after the job is gone. This ecosystem is for people facing powerful systems, people speaking, people planning, people documenting quietly, people recovering, people who are not ready to fight, people who are already fighting alone, people who found others and still paid the price, people who need language before they need a lawyer, people who need financial breathing room before they report, people who need to stop blaming themselves for not predicting what someone else would do. The goal is not to turn everybody into a warrior. The goal is to give people choices before corrupt employers take those choices away. I did not have all of these tools when I needed them, so I am building them now. Not because every workplace can be fixed. Not because every powerful person will be held accountable. Not because the truth automatically wins once it becomes visible. Some corrupt employers see the truth clearly. They simply decide their image matters more. That is the lesson that disappointed me the most. It is also the lesson that gave this work its shape. And it is the reason I will keep building